Welcome. My name is Jasmine Hall, and this is the Mishkan as a model for Israel and Jewish peoplehood. We are joined by Rabbanit Karen Miller Jackson today. And Rabbanit Karen Miller Jackson is a certified Meshivat Halacha, Jewish educator and writer known for her contributions to Torah Studies and educational initiatives, including at Matan Institute for Torah Studies. She is a member of the second cohort of SAC scholars and a Matan Kitvuni Fellow, currently writing a book on aggada and Talmud Berachot. Karen is also the creator of hashtag Power Parsha, host of the Aiden Central podcast, Women Wellbeing, and is the founder of Kivun sherut, a guidance program for religious girls before sherut leumi or army service. And she currently lives with her family in Ra'anana, Israel. Amazing to have you here as always, and we're so thrilled to hear what you have to share with us today.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for that lovely introduction. And it is my pleasure to be here. It's amazing working, this topic is exactly what we're doing here, talking about Israel and Jewish peoplehood and connection. And here you are in Washington, D.C., and here I am in Ra'anana, Israel. And I think this is the important work that we need to be doing, to be talking to each other and connecting, even across that 7-hour divide. So my topic today is the Mishkan as a model for Jewish peoplehood and Israel. I don't know if when the wonderful Uri Litzedek staff planned this specifically to have me fall out on the weekend between Yom HaShoah on the one hand and Israel's Remembrance Day, Yom HaZikaron, and of course Yom HaAtzmaut, celebrating Israeli independence. And so this topic is particularly meaningful as we sit between these two very significant points. Of course, the memory of the Holocaust alongside, separate from, and at the same time, not far from the establishment of the State of Israel. And when I think about Israel and Jewish peoplehood, today, this really jumps up as perhaps the two faces, the two aspects that go hand in hand of what the Jewish people are experiencing today. I have to start by saying that I will be this idea of Mishkan as a model for our nation is actually borrowed first to a certain degree from the writings of one of my teachers, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of course, the former chief rabbi of England, of the UK, Zichrono Tzadik Lebracha, and he famously compares the Mishkan to. He uses it as a model for the kind of society we want to build when we think about Western society. He wrote an entire book thinking about British society and what's broken in British society, what's good in British society, and what we can do to enhance and recreate society in a positive way. And I think that idea lies sort of, for me, it was a springboard in thinking about the Mishkan as a model both for Israeli society and for thinking about the Jewish people worldwide. Wherever we are facing our challenges. I can talk about sitting here from Israel. I can give that perspective. Of course, I've also come from living in the States for a big part of my life. And so, so I see the struggle with renewed anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the struggle to be connected to Israel from afar, on the one hand, and the struggle from here of living through a couple of years of war and the tragic things we've seen over the last few years, and at the same time, society struggling to keep up. Here in particular, the burning issue is on everyone's minds is how are we going to solve the dilemma of the ultra-Orthodox not joining the draft in the State of Israel. And at the same time, what that means is that there are people who are giving more than their fair share of effort to the cause of defending the State of Israel, which of course is the homeland, we have to remind ourselves, for the entire Jewish people. And so I think that what's actually quite amazing is that Rabbi Sachs wrote his book, The Home We Build Together, in the year 2007. It was published in 2007. And so it'll be quite astonishing as we get to read some of his writings here almost 20 years later. And they will resonate not only for our time, for Western society, the UK, America, but also for some aspects of Israeli society as well. So we'll begin with a question, and then I'll start sharing my screen, which is, what is it about the Mishkan that makes such a good model for thinking about thinking about the makeup and the framework of Israel and the Jewish people? I should also say that we know that there have been cracks in this relationship developing over time. Perhaps once historically we were more united with the establishment of the State of Israel, with the quick and proud victory of the Six-Day War in 1967. Jews in the diaspora felt they could walk around with pride after that. I think the experience of the last few years, certainly in what I see and hear, is very different today. On the one hand, we have a surge in connection to Israel and Judaism in Jews around the world, including in Israel, a turn toward the Jewish religion as a response to the October 7th tragedies. And at the same time, we have, unfortunately, the opposite, which is a distancing Jewish people who want to be, who are finding that they can't reconcile their differences, their belief systems with, and still feel connected to the State of Israel. And so I think that we acknowledge that there are cracks, and what we really want to think about is what we need to do. And when I say we, I hope all of us, and if we continue to think this way and talk this way, hopefully we can spread a little of this more positive and hopeful optimism for bonds among the Jewish people. So what is it about the Mishkan that makes such a great model for Israel and the Jewish people? So a little bit of context to remind you, we're in the middle of the book of Exodus when we start to hear about the building of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And what's happened until now is, first, the Jewish people, we hear in the beginning, are enslaved in Egypt. A great savior is appointed, Moses, and they, after a series of miracles, are taken out of Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, and then they cross the sea. The sea is split miraculously, and they cross the sea, and they eventually come to Sinai, where they are given the Ten Commandments, and they enter a covenant with God, and they become God's people. And so until now, if Judaism was passed down from parent to child through families in the book of Genesis, in the book of Exodus, we become a people. And so when we're thinking about peoplehood, already this book is suggesting that we need to be looking for the seeds, for the foundational ideas of what it means to be a Jewish people in the book of Exodus. And so all of this makes sense for the creating and building of a nation. What is somewhat surprising is that after the giving of the Ten Commandments at Sinai, the narrative of the book of Shemot really shifts gears. And the second half is filled with basically the story of the building of the Mishkan. There's actually 4 parshiot that are devoted to this. And in fact, there's much repetition. The first 2 parshas that talk about it are Truma and Tetzaveh, are outlining the laws of how to build the Mishkan. And then we have a little episode in the middle, and then we have the actual execution, the carrying out of building the Mishkan. And in the middle, we have the curious and upsetting story of the sin of the golden calf, where the people, Moses delays from coming down the mountain, and the Jewish people start worshiping the golden calf. It's important to note that many commentaries connect the building of the Mishkan to that story of the sin of the golden calf. We won't have time to get into that today, but it's an interesting question to think about going forward. If the Mishkan is such a perfect model, when we think about as a basis for the Jewish people, the first project that we do as a Jewish people, then why is it either an antidote to, or in somehow a response to the great sin of the golden calf, which the Jewish people committed. So I'll leave that question aside, and I want to focus on our main question: what makes the Mishkan such a great model for Israel and the Jewish people? So we begin with chapter 25 when we're commanded for the first time to build this thing, to build this Mishkan. I'd like to read with you and ask you to think about what are the words here that jump out as significant, as repeated, and what is it trying to convey to us about the meaning of this project, the significance of this project. So we hear in chapter 25, verse 1, "Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, daber al bnei Yisrael, vayikchu li truma, me'et kol ish asher yudvenu libo, tikchu et trumati." So you may already notice there's a word here that is repeated several times. God spoke to Moses saying, "Tell the Israelites to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved." In the Hebrew, it's repeated even more times, but the idea of a truma, a donation, a giving, a gift. And it goes on, verse 3, "And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them." And then we hear about the pieces, the elements which were donated to the tabernacle, all sorts of materials: gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair. You might be wondering where this group of ex-slaves who have been running for freedom and for their lives gathered all of these things from. Well, that is a question that will remain unanswered, but somehow they were able to donate these things to the building of the tabernacle, which of course was this structure which was put up and taken down and traveled with the people, carried it, and it traveled with them in their journeys. Tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, other stones. This is all just to give you a sense, an ephod for the ephod and for the breastpiece, all to give you a sense of the kind of materials that went into the tabernacle, the donations to the tabernacle, or whether it made up the structure itself or the furniture within it or the things that were used for rituals. These were the things that were donated, and it's important to note these things because we will get back to them later on. And then says God the following in verse 8, "And let them," famously, "V'asuli mikdash," Chet, "V'asuli mikdash, v'shachanti v'tocham," and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it. So on the one hand, the people are commanded to build this Mishkan, this structure, which is, of course, going to be what God describes as it's an unusual language. It seems to be a home for God. Make me a temple and I will reside there. I'm translating loosely. But the language already suggests that, of course, theologically, we know that God does not need a space. And at the same time, God is encouraging them to do this, is requiring them to do this. And God says, "Here I will dwell, but not in that space, within you. If you create this space, then I, the divine presence, will dwell within you, b'tocham, in your midst." And so there is something about the Mishkan which is already recalling the experience at Sinai, the revelation at Sinai, where that was the last time they felt God's presence. Here, in a way, the Mishkan is a sort of recreation of that, where they're able to continue to feel God's presence in this world. And so this is the first source that teaches us something about the Mishkan. We're going to read a little more and then we're going to analyze what this is all about. So just the first source to summarize what's emphasized there is the trumot, the giving, the gifts that they are bringing, all the different materials, and then God commands them to make this temple, this tabernacle. Now, I'm jumping all the way to the end. Okay, we're doing a little bit of bookends here. When we get to the end of the chapters that describe the actual building of the tabernacle, we hear the following language. And again, if you were with me in person, I would ask you to call out some of the language and what it reminds you of, what other stories it reminds you of. So we hear in verse 32 of chapter 39, ותחל כל עבודת משכן אוהל מועד, ויעשו בני ישראל ככל אשר ציווה השם את משה, כן עשו. So I'm skipping over the whole many chapters of description of what they did and how they put it together. And I also want to just add that, of course, Moses was not a builder, was not an architect, and he and God appointed an architect named Bezalel, who had a couple of assistants and a number of skilled workers who really did the work with him, okay? And that's another important point, okay? So now that they've completed their work, says the Torah, thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so, just as Hashem had commanded Moses, so they did. Okay, so they've done this, they've carried this out to its finish line. Anyone who has either renovated our house or built a house of any sort knows what an unbelievable undertaking, has a sense of what an unbelievable undertaking this must have been. And then it goes on in verse 42, ככל אשר ציווה השם את משה, כן עשו בני ישראל את העבודה. וירא משה את כל המלאכה, והנה עשו אותה כאשר ציווה השם, כן עשו ויברך אותם משה. So just as God had commanded Moses, the Israelites did the work. And when Moses saw that they had performed all the tasks as God had commanded, so they had done, then Moses blessed them. And so here, just in these 3 sentences, we are, if we have not noticed it yet, we are drawn into the striking and clear parallels between the story of the building of the Mishkan and another story of building or of creating, which is the first story in the Torah, the story of the creation of the world. Many commentaries and midrashim point out this connection, and I think that it's very significant. And so when I asked you in the beginning to think about what else the story of building the Mishkan might have brought up for you, this is a well-known connection, and I want to explore this further, what this means that there are direct parallels between the building of the Mishkan and the creation story. Before we get to that, I want to also mention that, of course, this is not the first time that anyone builds something in the Bible. When we study Torah, one of the things we look for is repeated patterns or stories or words that when the stories connect, they're meant to draw them together. We're meant to draw some sort of meaning from their connections. So on the one hand, we have stories of building which have gone bad in the Torah until now, and we have stories that have been hugely successful and divinely commanded. So just to take us back again to the beginning of Genesis, the story of the Tower of Babel, where that was a building that was not sanctioned by God and was understood to be for bad purposes. And so there are many commentaries explain what was wrong there. But the building project there was not a good building project. It was not blessed. As opposed to Noah, who builds his ark to save the world, what's to save a remnant of the world after God destroys all the evil that had spread. And there, the building project is very much divinely sanctioned, has parallels to the building of the Mishkan, and is certainly a project blessed and ordained by God. So we see that there are things to compare and contrast with. So what is the Torah trying to do? Why does God draw our attention so much in the building of the Mishkan to the creation story? What is God trying to convey? What is the Torah trying to convey to us about what the Mishkan is in our world? So I'll run through a few examples in case you didn't believe me. Here are some of the linguistic parallels we see between the creation of the universe and the creation of the Mishkan. First of all, the Hebrew roots, asa, to do, to make, okay, repeats itself. In the Genesis story, you can see on the left, and God made the sky, vayas, okay, is the word there. And God made the 2 large lights, and God made the beasts of the earth. At the same time, we have the same language in the Mishkan that we are told the Jewish people or whoever is building the tabernacle, they shall make me a sanctuary. They shall make an ark. Ark here being the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, in the tabernacle. Make me a table, all using the same language here. The Bible is incredibly literary, and when it uses this language in two stories so strikingly, we are meant to highlight these connections. Vayar, to see, okay? And either, now here, this fascinating parallel that comes across here. So if before the person doing, or the being doing in Genesis was God, in Shmot, it is the architect, the people who are making. Now, Moshe is also being compared in a way to God, because in the Genesis story, we hear God saw all that God had made, and behold, it was very good. And in Exodus, Moses saw the skilled work, and behold, they had done it as God had commanded. So here, Moses, in a way, is modeling God's role. Whatever God's role was in the creation story, Moses or the people are modeling that here in the Mishkan. Finally, we have the language it's actually not finally, one of the last things we have is the language of completion, okay? In the Genesis story, in creation story, we have Vayachal Elokim b'yom hashvi'i. The heavens and the earth and all of their array were completed on the seventh day, okay? And God completed all the work that he had done. This idea of not just starting a task, but taking it to the finish line. I'm sure all of us in our lives have things where we have a lot of ideas and get started on projects and then sometimes don't manage to carry through. And this is part of the process of this blessed work, is that you take it from the beginning point to whatever process it needs to go through to the finish line. And the same thing is true in the Mishkan. All the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed, and Moses completed the work. Okay, there's an aspect of finishing, of completion, that is important. And then we have blessing. God blesses the creation of the world. Moses blesses the creation of the temple, of the tabernacle. And of course, the sanctification. God sanctifies the creation of the world. And we are called on to sanctify the tabernacle and all of its vessels. So we see again and again that this parallel between creation, the creation of the world by God, and the building of the Mishkan by put in whatever, either Moses or the architect Bezalel or the entire Jewish people. And this, by the way, is an interesting question. This is what we're going to get into. Who built the tabernacle? Who was it for? This is showing that there's this deep parallel between what God had done in creation and what human beings are expected to do in creating this tabernacle, this Mishkan. Now, the Mishkan, of course, is something which existed in the time of the Tanakh, and after that we have the temple. But when we read these chapters in the second half of Exodus, we're no longer able to carry out this specific work of putting up a tabernacle and donating the goods and carrying it around with us. And so I like to read these and think we are meant to, first of all, understand what it meant to that specific people, the Jewish people, as they were forming themselves into the Jewish peoplehood, the Jewish nation, and also what we today, as the Jewish people, can look to in this story and take from this for our world today. So a couple of modern thinkers have approached this telling, and they've analyzed and created ideas of what this means for us, what we are meant to look at, what it meant for them and what it meant for us. So we'll begin with a short excerpt from Leon Kass. Leon Kass is a wonderful modern thinker on the Bible. He is very much interested. He reads Exodus through the lens of what he calls his book, Founding God's Nation. And so here, when we get to the story of creating the Mishkan, he reads it very much as what was the purpose of this project in the development of the Jewish people as becoming a nation, a society. And of course, this is with an ear toward thinking about what we in modern society can learn from this and can take from this. So Leon Kass says as follows, and he writes in such a beautiful way and unusual, unique way. The tabernacle will be Israel's first big project as a newly covenanted people. Yet it is hardly the Bible's first architectural or artistic venture. If we remember what we have read about the previous, often dubious projects reported in the Torah, we will be prepared to hear echoes and make comparisons. In addition to Moses' altar, which he built after receiving the law at Sinai, there have been multiple acts of building and making. The building of Pitom and Ramses in Egypt, the store cities for Pharaoh, was the Israelites' only prior construction project, performed as slaves under Pharaoh's command. Before that, and especially relevant here, we recall humankind's grandiose building venture, the City and Tower of Babel, an uninstructed project of the whole human race united, thwarted by the Lord himself. Before that, we have the morally dubious inventor of farming and sacrifices, Cain, fratricidal founder of the first city, whose shady descendants, Lamech and his sons, are the founders also of the arts. Before that, we have Adam and Eve, inventors of the needle and makers of the flimsy fig leaf aprons to clothe their nakedness, whose defective handicraft the Lord himself remedied with a gift of superior coverings made from animal skins. In contrast to these dubious and effective human artful undertakings, we remember two highly successful divine projects, both of them very relevant here. We recall Noah's Ark, the only previous joint building project, in which Noah's hands faithfully carry out the Lord's instructions with detailed measurements given as here in cubits to save a living remnant from the impending watery devastation. And before that, in the very beginning, we have the celebratory account of the Lord's 6-day creation of the heavens and earth, bringing order out of chaos through the acts of articulate speech and providing a terrestrial home for humankind made in his image. And as the perfection of that story, we recall that the Lord completed his creation by hallowing the seventh day, the first insertion of holiness into created order. This becomes the basis for the Sabbath teaching in the Decalogue, and as we will see, an enlarged Sabbath teaching appended to the law of the tabernacle. Leon Kass reminds me about another parallel, which I neglected to mention when we compared the stories of creation and the building of the Mishkan. Of course, both of them are capped with the story, with the command, with God resting in the creation story on the seventh day. And in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, we are given the command of Shabbat in the middle of the description of, after we're told to build the Mishkan, the end of that, we hear the mitzvah to keep Shabbat, just like the Bereshit story ends that way. And from here, the sages derive. They look at the Mishkan as the model for what work is and what work we should not be doing, what work we should be refraining from on Shabbat. And so we see that on the one hand, the Mishkan represents the best and the brightest and the most creative and incredible of human endeavor of what the Jewish people were able to be creative in. And at the same time, the requirement at some point to stop, right? The work is completed and now there's Shabbat, the requirement to rest. And when we look at these different building projects, which Leon Kass is talking about, one of the things that is so striking is that the ones which were not coming from divine orders or with spiritual purpose are ones where the people in the end let the creativity and their abilities perhaps make them forgetful of God. Let it they become too big in their own head about what they can do. And the story of the creation story and also of the Mishkan is also a deep reminder of, on the one hand, the great gift of what we can do in this world, and on the other hand, of the idea that we need to be mindful that this gift is coming from the ultimate source, from God. So now I want to take this a step further and show you some of the ideas that where Rabbi Sachs goes with this idea of the Mishkan. As I mentioned, Rabbi Sachs wrote a book in 2007 called The Home We Built Together, Recreating Society. And he talked about different models of countries and how they sort of treated people who were considered other, who had immigrated, who were different. And he looks at this history, and he has very interesting metaphors for how we should think about how they thought about their societies. So, for instance, he talks about Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, and he said Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries were like a country house, in the sense that people who were not of a certain skin color, of a certain birth, they could live in that country, but they were always guests in the country house. It was never truly their home. And of course, this is one of the reasons that led to the persecution of Jews in many of these countries during that time. So that was one model. He also talks about the model of America as a melting pot and the idea of trying to create a society, which is America of the 19th and 20th centuries, where America wanted to create a society where out of the many, we create one, to erase people's particular identities and to create one American identity. We know that that did not succeed, and that in the end, what people want generally is to at least keep their own particular identity and at the same time be a part of the collective. That would be a more ideal picture. But the American melting pot metaphor didn't work for that. He also talks about a third model and a final model, which is another failed model, which is the model of the Western society in the 20th century, embracing multiculturalism on the one hand, inviting and recognizing and wanting to promote diversity, but he called this the hotel. The hotel where people could all live in the same building together, but they didn't have any sense of community or neighborhood or belonging. It was each room, each person functioning alongside the others. Now, obviously, this is a somewhat simplified metaphor for the challenges that we see in Western societies in general and historically. But he says that what he believes is the model for a more forgiving society, a society in which people can, on the one hand, be themselves, keep their particular identity, and at the same time, very much feel a part of the collective, is what he calls the model of the Mishkan. And here, the Mishkan, he sees as the model of allowing for diversity, and at the same time, everyone being involved in something bigger together, being a part of a covenantal group of people committed to a particular purpose. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt from what he says about this. And I think that the same can be applied to when we think about the situation for Israeli society today and for Jewish peoplehood today. How do we think about ourselves as a people? There's so much difference, right? In the state of Israel, among Jews, there's so much difference. Jews coming from so many different backgrounds and so many different levels of religiosity and commitment. And of course, in the diaspora outside of Israel, Jews around the world also are speaking different languages and belonging to different denominations. And this is something which can allow for thinking about a wider, bigger tent and home, so to speak, tabernacle. So Rabbi Sachs says, the building of the tabernacle was the first great project the Israelites undertook together. It involved their generosity and skill. It gave them the chance to give back to God a little of what he had given them. It conferred on them the dignity of labor and creative endeavor. It brought to closure their birth as a nation, and it symbolized the challenge of the future. The society they were summoned to create in the land of Israel would be one in which everyone would play their part. It was to become, in the phrase I have used, it's the title of one of my books, the home we build together. Says Rabbi Sachs, we need a project that brings us together. He talks about then the way that there was complaining in the way the Jewish people, as they go through the Exodus, so easily were able to, they fell into conflict and lack of faith. And he says there is only one solution: to make the people co-architects of their own destiny, to get them to build something together, to shape them into a team and show them that they are not helpless, that they are responsible and capable of collaborative action. Genesis begins with God creating the universe as a home for human beings. Exodus ends with human beings creating the Mishkan as a home for God. Hence the basic principle of Judaism, that we are called on to be co-creators with God. And hence too the corollary that leaders do not do the work on behalf of the people. They teach people how to do the work themselves. So to summarize until here, we see that the Mishkan drew on this imagery of God creating the world and was trying to convey to us, both as the people coming out of Egypt with a lack of confidence and a lack of skills, that if we all work on it together and bring our diversity together toward this shared endeavor, this in and of itself gives us a feeling of collective identity. And that is a part of a society and a nation being strong and succeeding. So I think that is a very big part of the Mishkan being a good model for our world today. There's another aspect of the Mishkan which I want to touch on, which is that the Mishkan, you'll remember, was very much emphasizing the trumot, the giving. And of course, it is, it's becoming more and more known in the world that I've heard, even podcasters and people talking about, when you look at one of the things which I think, when I look at my children who are of this age, when you look at what gives strength to a lot of people in Israel and patriotism, is the fact that everyone is required to give 2 years or more of their time, of their life to this country. There's national service. There's of course army service. And what that does is it gives people it reminds them that they're a part of a greater society. It's so easy to retreat into your little world, where you went to school, who you talk to, your friends, your neighborhood, your shul, your community. But being part of something which is national is a reminder of that national identity. And so we see that the Mishkan very much emphasizes giving. In chapter 35 of the book of Shemot, again, the giving is emphasized. We hear, take from among you gifts to God. And here we have a new word, not just truma, but this idea, everyone whose heart is so moved shall bring them gifts for God, be it gold, silver, and copper. The words nadiv, nadava, nadav, and lev, hearts, are emphasized here. Generous of hearts. And in fact, I haven't brought you the whole text, but you'll have to trust me. The words are repeated a number of times, and the word lev, heart, is repeated in the section 14 times, not just 7, which is a number of completion, but 14, double that amount, to emphasize the incredible desire on the part of the people to give, to be a part. And I think this is very much in our DNA and part of who we are. We also hear that the women even were involved in the giving as well. And the Ramban, the Nachmanides commentary, actually says that it was the women who ran first to give. Just a little side and interesting point. But this was the spirit of giving that we see associated with the Mishkan. The Mishkan is that's a model of what we want. This is what we want for our peoplehood and for our societies, for our communities. And so the Mishkan really shows us how to do that. Now, there's one last piece of the Mishkan, which is surprising and unusual, which is that when we get to the end, we hear that the work is done. And you would have thought that it mentions that the work that Bezalel, the architect, or that God had commanded Moshe to do was done. But the language is different, and the language is incredibly interesting. It says, "Vatechel kol avodat mishkan olam moed, v'yasu b'nei Yisrael kechol asher tzivat Moshe ken asu." So much emphasis on doing, on action. I know this is an activist organization, so here we are. But more importantly, in this verse, it says that everything was completed, and the Vayasu b'nei Israel, the people of Israel, the nation, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, did everything that God had commanded Moshe to do. Now, this is very odd because God commands Moses to tell the architect Bezalel to build the Mishkan. Why is it giving credit to the entire Jewish people for building the Mishkan here when they were not the actual builders? So, one commentary, a rabbi from Morocco, known as the Or HaChaim, the Chaim Ibn Attar. You can see when he lived here on the slide, from 1696 to 1743, says as follows about this. He says, the Torah credits all of Bnei Israel for constructing the Mishkan, although it was only Bezalel and his helpers who performed the work. So what is going on here, he asks, and this is his solution. That is what is meant by Bnei Israel did, describing the whole nation as together constructing the Mishkan, since they donated the materials from which the Mishkan was built. This is in proximity to the biblical description of the clothing made by the individuals within the nation to emphasize the whole nation took part without differentiating between them. Hence, based on this, it was considered as though each individual Jew brought all the 13 basic raw materials needed for the Mishkan and participated in the construction of the entire Mishkan. Here, we are left with a fascinating idea to sit with and think about in terms of who does what when we look around society, and perhaps some people are doing more than others. There should be, on the one hand, everyone has to do something. Everyone has to be involved in some way. And at the same time, right, everyone has to be part of that collective, that national story. At the same time, within that, there are individual differences to what people do based on what they're capable of. And that is the model of the Mishkan. So the Mishkan is also teaching us not only about keeping our particularistic identity within a more collective story. It's also talking about the idea of inclusivism, which again is a word that I'm bringing you from one of my teachers, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who writes about this idea of inclusivism. He writes about it as an alternative to some of the other ideologies we've seen. First of which is exclusivism, the idea that in Judaism that one way is the only way, and rejecting anyone who does not agree. And at the same time, pluralism, which can, and feel free to disagree with me here, but which promotes the idea that everyone is on equal footing, which for some people is challenging to accept. So Rabbi Sachs proposes a new word. He calls it inclusivism, and he bases this on the Mishkan, and he writes as follows. The alternative is inclusivism. Inclusivism is the belief that the covenant was made with the people, not with righteous individuals alone. One may leave or enter the people by apostasy on the one hand, conversion on the other. But the normal mode of faith is through birth, community, and the transmission of tradition across the generations. Every Jew today who, after the tragedy of the Holocaust, the attacks on the state of Israel, remember, he passed away before October 7th, and the ravages of assimilation, chooses to say a Jew and have Jewish children is making a momentous affirmation that may not be dishonored. Even if we must sometimes reject the beliefs and deeds of an individual Jew, nonetheless he or she is a fragment of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which dwells in the midst of Jews wherever and whatever they are. For the inclusivist believes with perfect faith that the covenant binds all Jews to one another, and that a Jew who remains attached to the chosen people cannot be unchosen. So, with this, I send to you from here in Israel, where it seems like every week is a week of mixed, incredibly almost biblical levels of intensity and miracles and pain, as well as loss and tragedy. And we hope that we here are able to find our collective strength to keep renewing and rebuilding Israel into the best Israel it can be. And for me and for many Israelis, I know it is super important to reach out to keep that bond with the entire Jewish people, and to be very, very clear that you have been going through your own experiences and challenges over the last 3 years, and our hearts are very much with you. And the Mishkan, be it the state of Israel or be it the collective of the Jewish people, is a good model to think about how to keep that ahava and that bond going. So I wish everyone who is celebrating a happy Yom HaAtzmaut, and we should see peace and good things in our world.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Rabbanit Karen Miller Jackson for this wonderful talk. I loved your point, especially in the end, of keeping it with the community about how once you're part of the collective, you're always part of the collective. And I think that's really strong to emphasize right now, where it can feel like such an individual battle, to just emphasize that we are always part of a collective and will be valued as a collective. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us either on the live stream or after the fact. And we look forward to having you at our next talk.